Okay, hello. I'm going to be talking about Lost Creek Siphon. It's a big cave up in the Beartooth Mountains that I've been going to for the past 3 years. Uh, I've pretty much only been going there just kind of as a selfish endeavor. I just want to get to the bottom and I just want to go caving in there. So the cave itself right now is 650 feet deep. It was first bottomed in, I think, 1972, and since then there's only been 3 other trips, one in 1990s and then 2001 that were both successfully able to get to the bottom. But in the last 20 years, nobody's really been in the cave or tried to get to the bottom at all. So, first things first, after AGM last year, I hiked back up from the year before and hauled all of my rope out. I think I had about 800 feet of rope that I had to pack 5 miles out of the wilderness. This is when I visited the cave. This is during spring runoff. A huge amount of water entering the cave system. It's really cool.
Super cool.
Yeah. Oh. So yeah, there's a huge amount of water entering the cave, and the first drop is like 80 feet, and so it's just thundering. So when you're hiking to the cave about a quarter mile away, you can just hear like when you start getting excited. Actually, back in the day, people used to walk out onto this bridge and look down the first pit, but that's about as far as I got before I got too scared to continue any further. So also, another thing about this cave is there's a possible resurgence that might be lower down on the mountain called West Boulder Cave. So I went and visited that when I was hauling out rope and actually saw these really interesting mud lines in the mud going across at different levels, which I assume is probably from water either slowly rising or falling, which hopefully Bill's project will be able to give us a little bit more information about that. So after I hauled all the rope out, I went caving during the summer, and then I needed to bring all the rope back. So the weekend before the trip, I hiked up by myself. The first time I tried to do it, I ran into 5 bears and turned around. So the next day I came back out with more bear spray, and I hauled up 780 feet of rope, which was quite a slog. So these are all the different rope lengths that we brought just based on what we had been doing the years before and what we thought we'd need in the future. So then the big day of the trip was Labor Day weekend. A couple of us went up on the Friday, and then this is a photo of Brian coming up on the second day of the trip. To get to the cave, it's about 3 miles on trail, and then we actually have to wade across the river and then bushwhack 2 miles up the side of this mountain, and it's about 1,200 feet elevation gain. So this is the camp. It's much nicer than the years before. When I did it in the past, we always tried doing it in the winter, and that was terrible. There's a lot less water, but it was really cold camping. So we camped in, that's why we did this trip in the fall. There's a lot more water, but it was really pleasant camping, and much easier to get into the cave in the morning. So this is the first day, suiting up to get into the cave. Cave's behind me, and nice big landing area to get ready. One of the biggest issues we faced was not being able to talk to each other in the cave. Just from like me to Doug, we wouldn't be able to talk to each other because it's so loud. So we actually followed the advice of Willie Hunt, who did the last trip, and he said they used earpiece microphones. So I sewed up a bunch of these bags that we were able to hang off our harness so you have easy access to the microphone, and then we all had microphones underneath our headsets. So when we first got to the cave, there was one big issue. A new tree had got sucked into the sinkhole, so we had to deal with it, and we wanted to pull it out, but it was a little bit too heavy, so I just threw it in. So first trip on that Saturday was me, Keaton, and Savannah, and our goal was just to rig down to the top of Chalkstone Drop. So we had a ton of rope, brought it down, and when we got into the cave, there's a lot more water than we had remembered. And so we actually ended up having to put a couple more relays on the first drop to be able to avoid this huge column of water. We set up, I think the first relay was right there, then we actually put a deviation about 20 feet over to the side. We had to swing over and transfer to the different rope. And that's where we encountered the tree that I had pushed down. It didn't make it all the way to the bottom, so that became a little bit of an issue, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So Savannah came down a little ways, transferred her, gave her pack to Keaton, and then me and Keaton continued down bottomless pit. This is like my favorite place in the cave because there's actually a waterfall on both sides of you, and it's just like crazy all around. You can stay on a little ledge. Me and Keaton continued rigging down, and a little bit after this, Keaton actually turned around. He said there was too much water and didn't want to continue any further, so I took his bag and went down further by myself and made it to the Chalkstone Drop, which is where we had left off the year before. You can see the last bolt right there. This is why it was called the Chalkstone Drop. There used to be a chalkstone there, but then something happened and it disappeared. So then the second trip, well actually, so on the first trip, I was rappelling down the pit and I had all of my carabiners linked together on one side and I went to go unclip them and they were all gone somehow. So I lost 10 carabiners and had to call Brian from the top of the mountain that evening and tell him to bring up a bunch more carabiners. So him and James came up for the next trip. So Keaton somehow said he was sick and didn't want to go in the cave anymore. So it was me, Brian, and James. This is entering the overflow passage. It's really cool. You can see light maybe down to like 300 feet in the cave because the passage is just so big. So we made it down to the Chalkstone Drop and started rigging across. This is that last bolt. It was a very bad placement, and we ended up wanting to go to the other side of the pit, so we transferred rope to the other side and started chimneying out and stemming out and trying to traverse out to be able to avoid this water, because that's another column of water going down. You don't want to be in there. So when we were down there, all of a sudden we heard over the radio that something bad had happened, and I'd just like to take a little excerpt from Alpine Caving Techniques. Reblays. We always double these, except those that are installed for convenience rather than to avoid rope contact. Well, this rebelay was not for convenience, it was to avoid rope contact. And James was coming down, and he was about the 7th bolt, about to go out into the bottomless pit, and the bolt actually blew out of the wall. And luckily he was rappelling, so the rope didn't get damaged at all, and it was also 11 millimeter rope, so the rope rub didn't cause the rope to snap or anything, but the anchor had failed. It was partially my fault. In the morning when I passed the bolt, the hanger was a little loose for some reason, and I didn't want to dig in my bag, get my wrench out to retighten it, and so, yeah, that's a big, pay attention to your bolts. But luckily nothing bad happened. James did continue down to the bottom, or to the top of Chalkstone Drop where we were. So this is some old photos. Unfortunately, I think it's photos from a little bit further past this, but this kind of gives the idea of what we were doing. We went out to Willie Hunt's bolt and continued down the Chalkstone Drop. This is the bottom of the Chalkstone Drop, and then Puberty Pit, which is the largest drop in the cave. It's 110 feet. So I actually saw his bolts, and I used his 2 bolts, and then getting out over Puberty Pit, there's actually a really awesome natural jug that I was able to wrap a piece of webbing around. At this point, Brian's radio had failed, so he was just trying to yell at me. And we had also ran out of rope, or the rope that we had left was about 70 feet long, which is not 110 feet long. And we were down there anyway, so I was like, we just got to see how far we could go. So we ended up rigging off the top of it, and I rappelled down, set another rebelay using a bolt from 1970 to help hold me up next to the wall. And this is about as far as I got down into Puberty Pit. It was just like, I understand why it's called Puberty Pit now. I was terrified. There's so much water. And the rope was only about 40 feet below me at that point, so we couldn't continue any further. And so, yeah, came back out of the cave. And yeah, hopefully next year we can go a little bit further. Thanks.